One of the recurring themes in the Peanuts cartoon by Charles Schulz occurs every summer when Charlie Brown and the gang all have to go to camp. I mean, it's like getting drafted. In one of the cartoons that appeared during the summer of 1986, Charlie Brown and his sister Sally are looking out the window of a bus. The bus has stopped because Sally asks, "Where are we?" Charlie answers, "This is a survival camp." Sally asks, "Oh, what?" Charlie answers, "I think they're going to teach us how to survive." And Sally said, "That's easy." Charlie answers, "What do you mean?" And Sally simply says, "Don't get off the bus." Well, in our lesson of the morning, David has apparently been off the bus for a while. The Lord had given him rest from his surrounding enemies. The siege of Jerusalem is over. David is now king of Israel. He's installed the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem with great ceremony. All was quiet on the Western Front. But David was looking for something else to do. He wanted to build a temple, a permanent home for the Lord and his ark, which was currently housed in a tent. But that night, another word from the Lord came to Nathan the prophet. David was not going to be the one to build a temple. David's descendants were going to do that. But God promised to protect David and his descendants forever. And part of that proclamation involved the following verse. "I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with the rod of men, but my steadfast love will not be taken from him as I took it from Saul." Now, these words do not describe the behavior of a human parent. They describe how God was going to respond to the behavior of David's descendants. But they do contain some great truths, specifically two responsibilities that can help us guide those who are young as well as those who are young in faith. The first is discipline. When he commits iniquity, God said, "I will chasten him." That's the way the Hebrew verse reads. Now, the word chasten in this passage can best be rendered discipline, rebuke, or correct. It does not mean retaliate or destroy. So discipline might mean more than just punishment. It has more the effect of teaching. In his 1996 book, The Sibling Society, Robert Bly states that today's parents are more concerned with getting and keeping the love of their children than raising responsible, productive citizens. How tragic. This was written in the Wittenberg door over 40 years ago. It says, when it comes to raising children, our society is only 20 years away from barbarism. 20 years, it's all we have to civilize the infants born into our midst. These savages know nothing of our culture, our language, our religion, our values, our customs of interpersonal relationships, things like majority rule, minority rights, respect, decency, honesty, customs, conventions, courtesies. The barbarian must be tamed if civilization is to survive. The unrest that would come later in David's family might indicate David did not tame the barbarians. For example, later on, his son Absalom decided that he did not want to wait the extra years to be king. So he planned and conducted a revolution to overthrow his father's government. The revolution failed. Absalom was killed in battle. What is more, when David became old, his younger brother Adonijah decided to do just like his brother. He started out by getting this escort of 50 men and some cavalry and made this big show riding around town. David might have fared better had he applied some discipline. All he had to do was put loving but carefully defined limits on his son's behavior. Deion Sanders of Florida State, Atlanta Falcons, and Atlanta Braves fame is now the head football coach at the University of Colorado. According to his mother, Connie, Deion grew up a shy, quiet boy in Fort Myers, Florida. Connie Sanders could not remember Deion ever getting into trouble except this one time. Near the Sanders home stood an old building. Once when Deion was 9, he and his friends broke all the windows in the building. The police came. They put the kids in a patrol car and took them downtown. When the police called Connie and told her about the incident, she did not go running down to the jail and bail him out. She told the police to keep him a while. As she later said, I wanted to scare him a little bit. I went down there to get him. He was the last one to be picked up. He was crying. I never had a problem with him after that, except he was afraid of the dark. Children have to be taught some things if civilization is to survive. But in teaching, and this is my second point, discipline must be administered within the context of unwavering love. In the 15th verse, God promises that the house and kingdom of David will be secure no matter what. Discipline and corrective action do not exist in a vacuum. They exist in the larger context of the love of God, which is a love that will not let us go, but also the love that will not let us get by. No matter how serious the sin, the covenant of love shines through. No matter how bad the behavior, the atmosphere of love must prevail. And we need to have high, consistent expectation of those we raise, and we need to have high expectations of those we raise in faith, those we baptized. If you were ever at a service of baptism in the Presbyterian Church and you answered the questions to the congregation that you would undertake your share of responsibility for the Christian nurture of that particular child, you are that child's godparent. As the Army used to put it, we need to let them be all they can be. But this needs to happen in the context of love, which goes on and on and on and on. Paul the Apostle gave the parents of Ephesus a good guideline when he said, Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the nurture of the Lord. I once read about a person who put a cocoon in a jar so he could observe the metamorphosis. In the beginning and in the middle stages, the pupa began to squirm and writhe in its imprisonment. The struggle was so fierce you would wonder whether the butterfly would ever come out. Well, finally, one day, the observer couldn't stand it any longer. He took some scissors and snipped a few confining threads to make the escape from the cocoon a bit easier. It worked. The butterfly came out, but it looked like a worm. Huge, swollen body, tiny, shriveled wings. The exquisite markings and spots of color were still there. But because the man had cut the struggle short, the false tenderness of a few snipped threads had spoiled everything. The butterfly would never amount to anything except a stunted abortion, painfully crawling through life when God made it eventually to fly. We must love our young and young in faith enough to let them struggle. There are some things they cannot gain any other way. If we cut the struggle short, if we shorten each crisis, it may make it impossible for them to reach the heights that God intended. Because in Jesus Christ, God did not soften the crisis. Rather, as Paul the Apostle told the Romans, God gave him up for us all on a cross, so that you and I might be dead to sin and alive to all that is good. That is God's gracious gift to us, the death and resurrection of his only begotten Son. As Paul told the Ephesians, now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near in the blood of Christ. For he is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down the dividing wall of hostility. So then you are no longer strangers and sojourners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. God's blessing to each of you as we undertake our share of responsibility in our household and in the household of God to bring up those young in age and young in faith.